He mocked my sad little pension. He didn't know my pension came from 30 years of hunting war criminals across 3 continents. The air in my brother Roy's house was thick with the scent of lemon furniture polish and disappointment. It was a familiar combination. For 40 years, every family gathering had carried that same cloying weight. Today, it was supposed to be for me, my retirement party, but it felt less like a celebration and more like a final sentencing. Roy, ever the magnanimous host, moved through the living room with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent his life closing deals. His voice, a booming testament to his confidence, filled every corner of the oversized room. He was a successful man, a pillar of the community, the owner of 3 car dealerships. He had the sprawling house, the manicured lawn, the wife with professionally whitened teeth, and the 2 sons with business degrees from a state university he'd paid for in cash. He had everything a man was supposed to want. And he had me, his quiet, unmarried, childless older sister, the family's resident failure. I sat in a wingback chair that was just a little too soft, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. The cardigan I wore, a simple gray knit, felt like armor. It was my uniform for these events, a way to blend into the beige walls and patterned wallpaper. In my real life, my uniform had been different. Stiffly starched Class A's, practical BDUs, a tailored suit with reinforced seams that could hide the slim outline of a Sig Sauer P228. Here, I was just Edith, quiet Edith, the one who worked some boring government job in Washington and never had much to say for herself. The truth was, I had plenty to say. I just couldn't. Not to them. How could I explain the bone-deep chill of a mass gravesite in Srebrenica to people whose greatest tragedy was a dip in the stock market? How could I describe the hollow-eyed stare of a witness recalling the murder of her children to a room full of people complaining about their property taxes? My world was written in a language they couldn't read, its alphabet composed of classified documents, encrypted signals, and the silent testimonies of the dead. So I chose silence. It was a strategic choice, a doctrine I had adopted long ago. The memory of when that doctrine was born rose unbidden, as sharp and clear as the day it happened. I was 23, home on my first leave after completing the officer's basic course for the Judge Advocate General's Corps. I was proud. The uniform felt heavy on my shoulders, the gold bar of a second lieutenant, a small, bright sun on my collar. I thought they would be proud, too. We sat around the same mahogany dining table my father had inherited from his father. The scent then was pot roast and yeast rolls, not lemon polish. My father sat at the head of the table, a formidable, quiet man who had built a small construction business with his own 2 hands. Roy, already a rising star at his first car dealership, sat to my father's right. "So," Roy began, wiping his mouth with a napkin, "how's life in the Army, Edie? Still playing soldier?" I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the first sign of a coming storm. "It's going well, Roy. I've been assigned to the legal center at Fort Belvoir. It's challenging work." He chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. "Challenging? You're a lawyer who can't take a real client. What's the challenge, making sure the paperwork for Private Johnson's divorce is filed in triplicate?" He looked at our father for approval and got a small, tight smile in return. "I just closed a deal on 12 fleet vehicles for a plumbing company. My commission this month will be more than you make in 6. "It's not about the money, Roy," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Everything is about the money," he declared, leaning forward. "That's how you keep score. That's how you know who's winning. You've got a degree from a good school and you go off to play dress up for government wages. It's a waste." I looked at my father, hoping for an intervention, a word of defense. He just carved another slice of roast. His silence was its own verdict. In his world, success was tangible. It was a house you built, a business you owned, a family you provided for. My path was an abstraction, a detour from the proper course of a woman's life. A son in uniform that he might have understood. A daughter? He saw it as a failure to land a husband. I'm serving my country, I said, the words feeling thin and foolish in the warm, wood-paneled room. You're pushing papers, Roy shot back, while real people are out here building America. You get a government paycheck, a government pension, and for what? For shuffling memos from one desk to another. Don't pretend it's some noble sacrifice. It's the easy way out. The heat rose in my face, a burning wave of shame and anger. I wanted to tell them about the uniform code of military justice, about the solemn responsibility of upholding the law within the most powerful fighting force on earth. I wanted to explain that my work, even then, was about ensuring that the men and women who carried rifles in defense of our nation were held to the highest standard, that justice followed the flag. But looking at their faces, Roy's smug satisfaction, my father's stoic disapproval, I knew it was pointless. They had already decided who I was. Anything I said would be dismissed as a childish fantasy, a justification for a poor life choice. That was the day I stopped trying to explain. I packed my silence around my career like a protective casing. Over the next 30 years, they saw only the surface. They saw the frequent moves, the sparse postcards from Germany or Virginia, the lack of a husband or children. They constructed a narrative of a lonely, unfulfilled woman in a dead-end bureaucratic job, a black sheep. They never saw the rest. They never saw the cold sweat on my brow as I interviewed a terrified Serbian farmer who had watched his neighbors being loaded onto a truck by men in paramilitary uniforms, men whose names he knew. He spoke in a whisper, his eyes darting toward the door of the safe house, and I wrote down every word, each syllable a brick in the wall of a prosecution. They never saw me standing in a field outside a small village in Kosovo, the air thick with the smell of turned earth and decay, as a forensics team from the UN carefully unearthed the evidence of a massacre. I didn't flinch. I just made notes, my handwriting steady, clinical. The emotion was a liability. The facts were the weapon: Sarajevo, Pristina, The Hague, Arlington. They never saw me in a windowless room in The Hague, locked in a battle of wills with a former militia commander, his eyes full of smug hatred. He thought he was smarter than the American woman in the simple suit. He postured and lied for 7 hours. But I had the evidence. I had satellite photos, intercepted communications, witness statements. I had the facts. And in the 8th hour, I watched his arrogance crumble into the pathetic whining of a cornered bully. They never saw the long, lonely flights back to the States, the sensory whiplash of transitioning from a world of checkpoints and razor wire to the clean, orderly aisles of a suburban grocery store, the sudden panic that would grip my chest when a car backfired, the instinct to scan every face in a crowd for threats, the constant low-grade hum of hypervigilance. It took days, sometimes weeks, to recalibrate, to force the soldier back into her box so the civilian could function. I would come to these family gatherings feeling like a foreign operative, studying the local customs, mimicking the language of mortgages and school districts, all while a part of my mind was still cataloging exits and assessing potential threats. My life was a paradox they could never comprehend. The quiet woman in the corner of their living room had cross-examined men who had ordered the execution of thousands. The sister they pitied for her empty house had built legal cases that reshaped international law and brought monsters to justice. My silence wasn't weakness, it was security, it was a necessity. It protected them from the world I inhabited, and it protected my world from their judgment. Back in Roy's living room, the party had reached its crescendo. My brother, holding a glass of champagne, stood by the fireplace, its mantelpiece crowded with his sales trophies. "All right, everyone, quiet down," he boomed, his voice echoing with false bonhomie. The polite chatter subsided. All eyes turned to him. "As you all know, we're here today to celebrate my sister, Edith. After, after a whole lot of years, she's finally retiring from her government job." He paused for effect. "A salesman's trick. We were never quite sure what she did," he continued, a conspiratorial wink to the crowd. "Something with papers, I think. Very important papers." A few of his friends chuckled. "But she was dedicated. Moved all over the place for those papers, never did settle down, but I guess the paperwork kept her busy." My jaw tightened, a familiar ache. I kept my eyes on the melting ice in my glass. "And now she gets to enjoy the fruits of her labor," Royce said, raising his glass. "She gets to kick back and live off her sad little pension from Uncle Sam." He laughed, a loud, braying sound. "It probably won't be enough to buy one of the new models on my lot, but hey, it's something to Edith on a life of service." The room filled with a smattering of applause and polite toasts. A few cousins shot me sympathetic glances, the kind you give a sick relative. They saw pity. They didn't see the cold, controlled anger deep in my belly. It was an old friend, that anger. It had fueled me through 17-hour workdays, through death threats, through the crushing weight of the things I had seen. It was a clean, pure energy. And Roy, in his ignorance, had just poured gasoline on it. He thought a pension was just money. He didn't understand that my pension was paid for in more than just time. It was paid for with sleepless nights, with friendships I couldn't maintain, with a life I had sacrificed for the mission. It was paid for with the ghosts of witnesses who were too scared to testify and the ones who were brave enough and sometimes paid the ultimate price. His world was built on commissions and profit margins. Mine was built on evidence, testimony, and the unwavering belief that justice, no matter how delayed, must be served. He saw a small number on a government check. I saw the closing of a ledger that had been open for 30 years. I didn't say a word. I simply raised my iced tea in a silent, ironic toast and took a slow sip. My silence infuriated him more than any argument could. It was a wall he couldn't breach, a language he didn't speak. He saw it as surrender. I knew it was control. The party began to wind down. People started collecting their coats and offering their goodbyes. Roy was basking in the glow of his performance, accepting compliments on his generosity for throwing me this party. I was preparing my own exit strategy when the front door opened. Two men stood in the entryway. They were not party guests. They were young, ramrod straight, with the impassive, watchful eyes of professionals. They wore the crisp service uniform of the United States Army Military Police. The air in the room changed instantly. The cheerful chatter died. The music suddenly seemed loud and inappropriate. Roy, his hosting duties kicking back in, strode toward them. "Gentlemen, can I help you? I think you might have the wrong house." The MPs ignored him completely. Their eyes scanned the room, methodical and precise. One of them spoke into his wrist. "Ma'am, we have eyes on the colonel." "Colonel?" A ripple of confusion went through the remaining guests. Roy's smile faltered. Then a third man stepped through the door, and the room seemed to shrink. He was in his late 60s, tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore the Army's dress blue uniform, and the front of it was a constellation of ribbons and medals. On each shoulder, 4 silver stars glittered under the light of Roy's chandelier. General Thomas Whitmore, Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, a man I hadn't seen in person in over a decade, but with whom I had shared more secure video conferences than I could count. Roy's jaw went slack. He was a man who understood hierarchy, the hierarchy of the bank account and the sales chart. But this was a different kind of power. This was the real thing. It was quiet, absolute, and it had just walked into his living room. I'm Roy Hayes, my brother stammered, extending a hand. This is my home. General Whitmore's gaze passed over him as if he were a piece of furniture. His eyes found me in my wingback chair. The years fell away. I was no longer quiet Edith in the gray cardigan. I was Colonel Hayes, JAG Corps. He walked directly toward me, his polished shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. The two MPs fell into step behind him, their presence a silent, unbreachable perimeter. The remaining family members flattened themselves against the walls, their faces a mixture of fear and astonishment. The general stopped 2 feet in front of my chair. The scent of clean wool and old leather cut through the cloying lemon polish. For a moment, we just looked at each other. He saw the 30 years just as I did. He saw the dust of the Balkans, the damp chill of The Hague, the sterile quiet of the SCIFs at the Pentagon. Then he spoke, his voice a low baritone that commanded the absolute silence of the room. It was not loud, but it carried an authority that made Roy's booming voice seem like the yapping of a small dog. Colonel Hayes. The word, the rank, hung in the air like a detonation. I saw the shock on my cousin's face. I saw my sister-in-law's hand fly to her mouth. I saw Roy, his face pale, his entire reality tilting on its axis. I inclined my head slightly. General, I apologize for the intrusion, Edith, he said, his tone softening for a moment. I know you're officially retired as of 1700 hours yesterday, but something came through on a secure channel an hour ago. I felt you should be the first to know. He held out a large, stiff manila envelope. It was sealed with wax, bearing the crest of the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal, a totem, a piece of junk to the uninitiated, but a sacred object to those who knew. The Hague has returned a verdict on Karadzik's deputy, General Whitmore stated, his voice formal again. Guilty on all counts. Genocide, crimes against humanity, violations of the laws of war, life imprisonment. The air left my lungs in a slow, silent rush. The final piece. The monster I had spent the last 5 years of my career building a case against. The architect of the camps, the butcher's right-hand man. They wanted to honor the prosecutor who built the foundational case 30 years ago, the general continued. The one who found the first witnesses, secured the first pieces of evidence, and never let go. The one who laid the groundwork for everything that came after. He placed the envelope in my hand. My fingers, steady after all these years, closed around it. Roy made a small, choking sound. He was staring at the 4 stars on the general's shoulders, then at the official UN seal on the envelope, then at me. His mind was frantically trying to reconcile the woman he had just mocked, with the woman being honored by one of the most powerful men in the military. The equation would not compute. Then came the moment that shattered his world completely. General Thomas Whitmore, a 4-star general, a man who answered only to the Secretary of Defense and the President, straightened to his full height. He looked me directly in the eye. His movements were sharp, precise, imbued with a lifetime of discipline and command. He raised his right hand to his brow in a perfect, unwavering salute. The 2 MPs behind him mirrored the action in perfect unison. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. In that single, silent gesture, the entire social order of my family was not just upended, it was annihilated. The successful brother and the failure sister, the loud voice and the quiet one, the man with the sales trophies and the woman with the sad little pension, all of it burned to ash in the fire of that salute. A 4-star general does not salute a retired colonel. It is a gesture of profound, almost unheard of respect. It was a recognition not of rank, but of a debt. My eyes met his. I gave a slight, formal nod, the civilian equivalent of returning the honor. It was all that was required. "It's been 30 years, ma'am," General Whitmore said, his hand still at his brow. "You finally got him." He lowered his hand. The MPs lowered theirs. I looked past him at my brother. Roy's face was the color of ash. His mouth was open, his eyes wide with a dawning horror and a complete, shattering incomprehension. He was looking at me as if for the first time, and he was seeing a stranger, a dangerous stranger whose life was an impenetrable fortress he had only ever mocked from the outside. "We have a transport waiting, Colonel," the general said softly, "if you'll come with us." I stood up, the soft wingback chair feeling alien against my back. I placed the iced tea on the end table. I left the UN envelope there beside it, a small gift for Roy, something for him to stare at after we were gone. As I walked with the general toward the door, the MPS falling in behind me, I did not look back. There was nothing left to see. The judgment had been rendered. The case was closed. The debrief happened in the back of a black Chevrolet Tahoe with tinted windows that idled silently at the curb. The world of the party, of Roy's shocked face and my family's stunned silence, vanished the moment the heavy door clicked shut. The air inside was cool and smelled of clean upholstery and electronics. It was a familiar, comforting environment, an office. "The secretary sends his personal congratulations," Tom said, his voice back to the familiar, tired tone of a man who carried the world on his shoulders. "The White House will issue a statement in the morning. Your name will be redacted, of course. A senior JAG prosecutor is how they'll phrase it." "Of course," I said. Anonymity had been my shield for 3 decades. I had no desire to give it up now. "The witnesses? All safe, relocated. The program worked." Good. That was the only victory that truly mattered. We rode in silence for a few minutes, the streetlights of my brother's perfect suburban neighborhood sliding past the window. My victory wasn't the look on Roy's face. That was just collateral damage. My victory was a quiet, cold thing, something I would hold in the silent moments before sleep. It was the knowledge that a man who believed he was above justice would now die in a concrete box 1,000 miles from the country he had terrorized. The satisfaction wasn't in the applause, but in the simple, brutal fact of the verdict. Justice. For 30 years, my family saw a shadow, a vague outline of a person they filled in with their own assumptions of failure and loneliness. They never understood that my silence was not empty. It was full. It was full of the names of the dead, the faces of the witnesses, and the crushing weight of the law. I did not need their approval. I did not need their understanding. I had my mission, and the mission was complete. My name is Edith Hayes. I am 63 years old, and for the first time in more than half my life, my work is done. The silence from now on is my own.